Well, I'm going to start on time. I realize that others may come in as we get rolling here. A few preliminary comments. This is really the third meeting we've held in this room on this subject since June of 16. And my goal there was to try to keep everyone informed about the progress of our studies, which have been ongoing now for 3 years, as we closed in on the final recommendations. My name is Gary Hodge. I've worn a lot of hats over the years. I was director of Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland for 18 years, from 1980 to 1999. And then started a little consulting company on public policy and economic development and such, which I've done for about 17 years. And along the way, I served a term as a Charles County Commissioner from 2006 to 2010. And one of the long-term visionary goals that I've tried to pursue over that entire stretch of time has been bringing high-capacity fixed route transit to Southern Maryland and especially to Waldorf from Branch Avenue Metro. And we've had many successes along the way and many frustrations, which if you work on any project of great significance, you get used to picking yourself up after the setbacks that normally occur when you're dealing with big, expensive projects that are extremely complex and difficult to deliver. So there are a few people in the room who have very extensive transit planning experience. And some of you may be here for the very first time. So I don't want to make any assumptions about how much you know about this project already, but by the same token, I don't want to do a deep dive into the minutia if you're familiar with what's been happening on this over the past recent years. And in terms of attendance, we've had, our last meeting, we had people standing against the wall. We had about 75 people here. And so it really depends on the day of the week and so on. And since I've dipped my toe into social media, which I was very reluctant to do, in setting these meetings up, Chris Ripley, who's in the back, and he's going to be videotaping this meeting, you get a wide variety of comments. You get some comments that are hooray, and some comments that I'm against it. So you navigate all that, and in the interest of keeping people informed, I've thought it was best to use all the available means to inform people, and I appreciate the Maryland Independent having run a little item in the paper Friday to alert folks. And Paul Lagasse is here from the paper, so there's a possibility if you make a comment you may be quoted. So I just wanted to let you know that. I started work on this in 1988 when I drafted a letter for all of the elected officials of Southern Maryland, and in those days we considered Prince George's County part of Southern Maryland. So we had a letter signed by every elected official, every county commissioner, every legislator in Prince George's and Charles, St. Mary's, and Calvert counties to then Governor William Donald Schaefer. Now you may remember a lot of things about William Donald Schaefer, not the least of which was that he was a doer. And he got up one day and he said, "I think we should have light rail in Baltimore." And light rail appeared. And you can see that when you go to the Orioles games at Camden Yard. We can debate whether that's a good system or not, but the point is that it took the affirmative, aggressive action of an executive leader like William Donald Schaefer to make that happen. Of course, we now have a state that's crisscrossed with rail. We have Amtrak, we have Metro, both here and in Baltimore, here being the Washington area. We have MARC that runs commuter trains. We have light rail in Baltimore. We have the Purple Line, which seems to now be underway and moving forward. But we don't have a single inch of passenger rail that serves our people here in this region, Southern Maryland. And so in 1988, this collective group of elected officials sent a letter to Governor Schaefer saying, we need rail through southern Prince George's County from Branch Avenue Metro to Waldorf. Now, since then, we've had 5 studies, 5 major state studies on this issue. Now, all 5 of them reach the same conclusion. Passenger rail to Southern Maryland is feasible. It's economically viable. It's needed. And yet, after each of those studies, there was a hiatus of 2 or 3 years, while the elected officials of the region kept pressing the state, and finally the state acceded to doing another study. So where we stand today is that we are wrapping up the 5th of those studies. And it's called the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit Study. It was a $3 million study and took 3 years to complete. And it had several objectives, but I want to mention how that study came about. In 2013, the state realized that we needed more revenue for transportation. And then Governor O'Malley was the governor. And one day I'm sitting in front of Starbucks and Governor O'Malley calls me on the phone. And he says, Gary, we're trying to get this bill passed to increase revenue for transportation. What do you need down there in Southern Maryland? And I said, I'm a team player, so I added a few things that other people wanted. But I said, we need 3 basic things. We need to move the light rail project into project planning and NEPA studies. We need a new bridge across the Potomac. And we need 2 interchanges in Waldorf. One at Leonardtown Road and one at Mattawoman Beantown Road. So he said, well, I appreciate your input, and it looks like the few votes I need to get this passed are going to be very expensive. So all of our legislators from Charles County supported that legislation and voted for it. And the next year, the study that we're going to talk about tonight was initiated. It wasn't project planning, which I wanted it to be, but it was another rung in the ladder to get us to project planning. And I'm just going to highlight a few things that the study was intended to do. And I'm going to mention the website that you can find all the detail you can imagine on this study, so that if you want to go to that website, you can read the 500-page report, the executive summary, look at all the maps, look at where the stations would be located, look at where the alignment is. and that's mta.maryland.gov/SMRT/. mta.maryland.gov/SMRT/. If you go there, everything that I'm going to more or less broad brush today, you can do a deep dive on and get all the detail you want on where the exact alignments are, where the stations will be, and how the whole system is navigated.
And Gary, it's not particularly mobile friendly, so you might want to do this when you get home.
Oh, believe me, I'm not suggesting you do it right now. It is a
You're clicking.
okay. It was a very complex, lengthy piece of work with an outstanding consulting team, a lot of interagency cooperation, and so on and so on. Now, here were the goals of the study. First of all, we needed to update the ridership estimates for the transportation system. Again, we're talking about fixed route, high capacity, either BRT or LRT, bus rapid transit or light rail transit. Now, I'm an unabashed advocate for light rail transit because I know what the perceptions are around the country, and I know that even though the state wants to push BRT because they think it's cheaper to build, etc., and they've put out a nice glossy brochure on BRT that will dazzle you. The reality is that BRT often becomes BRT light. You sort of get into the implementation process and then, well, maybe we can mix buses and cars here or there. Maybe we don't need a completely reserved, dedicated transit way there, etc. And there are complexities in operating these vehicles on the roads to start with. The magnet for economic investment in transit is fixed rail transit. And I'm just going to be blunt about this. If someone proposes to build a BRT line for $1.1 billion from Branch Avenue to Waldorf, I'm going to do everything I can to prevent that from happening, because that would be a complete waste of public funds. That would not justify. It's not worth the candle, as the British would say. Because we don't have a simple goal here of just moving people more efficiently from point A to point B. Our goal is much more ambitious than that. Our goal is to create a catalyst for economic investment in walkable, livable communities. And we can do that with passenger rail transit. We can't do that with a bus system. So if all we're talking about is moving people more efficiently, as grateful as the 46,000 people who drive to work every day in the Washington area would be if we did that, that's not enough. And the difference in economic impact of BRT versus LRT is like night and day. We can pay for the cost of this entire system with the difference between the economic impact of BRT and LRT. Now, that means we're smart. That means we don't do stupid things. That means that we look at the activity centers that are already emerging in the 3015 corridor, like the Southern Maryland Hospital Center, or Andrews Air Force Base, or Brandywine Crossing. we look at those hotbeds of activity that already exist, that could be dramatically important economically for the entire corridor. In essence, could become the backbone of the economy of this entire corridor and region. In fact, and I'm not really given to hyperbole and exaggeration, but I believe that this would be one of the most important economic development projects in the history of Southern Maryland, and we would be comparing it to Pax River and Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant in terms of the magnitude of its impact. Not only that, it will deliver other things. We all have concern about sprawl and the mismanagement of our land resources. And the very best tool we could have for managing growth in the future, focusing it where the infrastructure already exists, or the infrastructure can be laid in economically and with a good return on investment. If we want to focus growth in the future where we have infrastructure and where we want to build quality of life and where we want to create a hotbed for high quality jobs, so that maybe we have somebody who lives in Clinton who wants to work in Waldorf, they can take the train to Waldorf. It's not just a one-way system. It's a system that mutually benefits the whole corridor. So this is our story, and I believe this story hangs together. And this is essentially the same message we have been giving state policymakers now for almost 3 decades. And I know because I've been there every day of it. And I believe in perseverance, but this has stretched my patience to the breaking point, because it is so self-evidently beneficial to the people of this region. Now, let me move down this list quickly of other things this was to deliver. Ridership projections, refine the transit route. As I said, we had some really exceptional consultants working with us. And when I say us, Jason Groth, who is the chief of resource and infrastructure management for the county, and I served on the steering committee for 3 years. So every month or two, we would have a meeting of our steering committee. We would give advice to the planners and consultants. And so when I say us, I've been a part of that team for the last 3 years. So we had some exceptional consultants who refined the alignments, the station locations. We had some major problems to solve. I'll give you an example of one. We had to figure out how to get this thing over the Beltway. Because once we get up to the Beltway, we've got to come into the Branch Avenue Metro Station, and it has to work. It has to fit right. And we've got some issues up there with some wetlands and with some neighborhoods and so on. And I've said, this is one of the cleanest alignments you'll ever find. We're going up a transit way that's 70 feet wide, laid right next to the CSX line, from White Plains to the county line. Beautiful. We're not, compared to the Purple Line, this is a piece of cake. If you look at the route of the Purple Line, and I grew up in those neighborhoods, you know how much how many dwellings, how many businesses they had to acquire in order to navigate that route. This is relatively clean compared to that. We lay right next to the CSX line up to the county line, and then we go up the 5301 corridor in the highway envelope. Now, yes, the state is going to have to reserve 70 feet for us in that envelope. And I'm not portraying any of this as easy, okay? But relative to other projects across the country, I know places that would beg for an alignment this easy. And then along the way, of course, we'll pull in to the activity centers like Brandywine Crossing, Southern Maryland Hospital, Andrews Air Force Base, on the way to Branch Avenue. And we're going over the Beltway. We're not going under the Beltway, we're going over the Beltway. It's cheaper, it's better. We don't have to dig a big, expensive tunnel to do that. And we found exactly the right spot for it. Questions after, if you could. Thanks. And I'm eager to get your questions. So it's an 18.8 mile route from White Plains to the Branch Avenue Metro Station. And that has been engineered very well and to a much more detailed level than we might have expected. The estimate of the economic impact, well, I've already touched on that. And I could read you a paragraph in this executive summary, but you're going to read that anyway when you get home. And the main point there is that we're talking billions of dollars of economic impact. And again, dramatically shows the difference in economic impact between the two modes, BRT and LRT. Because frankly, the private sector wants to put investment where it's going to be permanent. Another thing that's happened in other places around the country is a BRT line will be built, and then the next Board of Commissioners or the next mayor or whatever will say, gee, you know, we'd really like that bus line over there instead of here. Well, if you're a private sector person who's investing in development, why would you make an investment when the route could change? So they feel they want to invest in transit-oriented development within walking distance of a rail line, which is more permanent. Updating the cost estimates for construction. Well, the study that was done in 2010, which was the one before this one, which was really also an extraordinary piece of work and which is also available if you'd like to look at it on the same website, estimated that BRT would cost about $1.1 billion and LRT would cost about $1.5 billion. And frankly, this study hasn't really improved on those numbers. So, BRT is about $500 million cheaper to build. However, it's a lot more expensive to run. And so when you're building the system and investing public dollars in your choice, BRT or LRT, you have to think about the long-term costs of operating those systems. And so I'm going to get a little bit into the final point here, which was evaluating the pros and cons of BRT versus LRT. Now, I've already hammered some of those points, so I'm not going to really repeat those. But on the operating cost issue, it's worth noting that to handle the projected ridership, which is like 28 or 29,000 riders a day on this system, to handle the projected ridership during peak hours when everyone's going to want to board, the BRT system would have to use what's called 3 bus platoons, which means that somehow 3 buses are going to have to roll into the station almost bumper to bumper, pick up 270 riders, 90 people per bus, and roll out and meet a schedule. And among the planners that we were engaged with on this study, there was more or less a consensus that that was impractical, and that it would be far preferable to have a 2-car train that would hold 300 people make that same maneuver. So we end the study with what I believe to be, and I believe that people who have worked on it as closely as I have believe, and the consultant team believes, was a fatal flaw in the BRT system, the BRT option. And here's the fatal flaw. We get to the very end of the study. We get to the 11th hour, 1 minute to midnight, on this 3-year study. And the consensus is, well, we've gone through all of this planning and all of these analyses and the pros and cons of the 2 options, only to discover that BRT is not really a viable option. Because the day the system opens, it will have no capacity for expansion. Because where is this region going? If you look at the corridor from Waldorf to Branch Avenue, we're going to have a 25% increase in population in the next decade or decade and a half. How are we going to accommodate the additional riders on this system if it's at capacity when we open it? So this puts the state administrators on the horns of a dilemma. The state really, really wants to recommend BRT. They've got an itch they can't scratch. They're pushing that option. They really want the numbers to come out favorably on that. And they're touting a 41-minute ride from White Plains to Branch Avenue by bus rapid transit, which is really the same estimate they come up with for light rail. But they've created this mountain of justification for BRT that is completely undermined by this fundamental fact staring at them, that we would end up spending $1 billion to build a BRT system that would be obsolete the day it opens. And what would we do then? Because I'll be long gone by then. I'll be, I've spent 30 years on this. So when that happens, you'll be back in this room. You'll be back in this, I promise you. You'll be back in this room the day the BRT system opens, and what will you be saying? We want LRT. We want LRT. So state, spend a couple of $100 more million for us, putting in what you should have put in the first place. All right. Now here's what we've got facing us. The Secretary of Transportation, and again, I try to be temperate and steady and even-tempered, but this is a case where I'm going to say some things with the newspaper here that are for attribution, that need to be said, and I'm just going to lay it out as I see it. On March 23rd, we had a meeting in the Secretary's office. I was there. Jason Groth, who I've mentioned, was there. Mel Franklin from Prince George's County was there. He's a member of the county council and has been bird dogging this with me for years. Mike Malinoff, the county administrator from Charles, was there. And a whole bunch of state employees. And we made our case, and we said we have a chorus of unanimity from the elected officials of the two counties, Prince George's and Charles, that we want light rail transit. And we have had that unanimity on paper, in letters, for the last 10 years. And these are the reasons why we need to build LRT. And they're the reasons I've already gone through with you. And Pete Rawn, the Secretary of Transportation, basically brushed us aside. And he said, I'm recommending BRT. Now, there comes a time in public service, and I've been around a long time. I've worked with 4 governors, every elected official in Southern Maryland, state legislator, commissioner, you name it, for 38 years. And the only phrases that I could come up with to describe how I felt when a deliberative, thoughtful, fact-based analysis had been concluded and then brushed aside was depraved indifference. Depraved indifference. And blunt force trauma to the vision of this region. I've thought a lot about those words, but I don't have any choice but to say those words because there was a cavalier, careless attitude behind the action that we saw on March 23rd that can't go unchecked. Now, the consequences of this are enormous. We now have a report which you will look at when you have a chance. We have a report here that would be regarded as the platform for the next step. The launching pad, the springboard for the next step in this effort. We should be starting project planning on this project in the next Consolidated Transportation Program. We should be starting project planning and what we call the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process on this alignment and this project in the next CTP, what will that cost? That would cost $9 million a year for the next 3 years. We have a $4.9 billion transportation program in the state of Maryland that is doing nothing for the people of Southern Maryland. Nothing. And I'll discard a few examples just to show you that it's nothing. The state has promised to build a new bridge across the Potomac River, which, by the way, won't be finished until the end of this governor's second term. That will be financed with state toll money. You don't finance that when you pay for your gasoline with the gas tax. That's financed by the tolls that are collected at the Maryland toll facilities. The other day, the lieutenant governor was in Indian Head and announced a grant for a project I care deeply about. I helped make the arrangements for the state grant that he announced, a $3.3 million grant to build a boardwalk on the Potomac River in Indian Head, which is desperately in need of revitalization. I applaud the state for that. However, that's not state money. That's transportation alternatives money that's appropriated by Congress. You don't get on the scoreboard for that. You don't get on the scoreboard for the nice bridge replacement. We need a new bridge across the Patuxent River from St. Mary's to Calvert County to serve the biggest economic engine in Southern Maryland. There's nothing on the schedule to replace that bridge. Now, that bridge would be paid for out of our gas taxes, which we increased because the governor asked for support because we got that support. Now, here we stand. We need $9 million next year to start project planning on this transformational transit system for our people, so they don't have to struggle up that highway for the next 30 years in one of the worst commutes in America. And we can't squeeze $9 million out of the Secretary of Transportation to do that because of depraved indifference to our needs here. Pure and simple. And all I can tell you is this: we have turned every screw, we have opened every door, we have buttonholed every elected official in the state to get something done on this for almost 3 decades. And the only way that's going to happen is if the people make their voices heard. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road. On October 24th, Mr. Ron will be here with his team in La Plata at the county government building for the annual tour meeting with our elected officials. And that will include our county commissioners and our state legislators. And at that meeting, he will explain what he's doing or not doing for Charles County. If there were 200 people with signs in front of the door of the government building demanding action on this project, that could make a difference. But believe me, we have rung every bell there is to ring through the government system. And I know because I've been there ringing them. Now, there's a couple other things we could do. And I plan to request of our legislators that a hearing be held in the next session of the General Assembly to discuss the misappropriation of $3 million in state funds to conduct a study whose findings were summarily disregarded by the Secretary of Transportation. And I want the experts and the people who spent 3 years in good faith completing this work to sit in front of the House Appropriations Committee and tell them that bus rapid transit is a non-starter in Southern Maryland and that the state needs to put 0.0018% of its budget into doing project planning and NEPA for this project. And we'll see what happens. So that's my wrap-up of where we are.